recording, I'll just mention again, I'm Denny Daniel, and this is the Museum of Interesting Things. These machines were the first record players, and I've got over probably a couple of hundred of those records. They were made out of beeswax in the beginning, and a few other ingredients, and then the later ones were made out of celluloid. That's a celluloid one. And there, I'll play you a little bit more because it's probably the nicest thing you'll ever hear. So that artist is Ada Jones. She was kind of the first big female recording artist back in the early 1800s. So we're talking about like 1802, 1812. That's around the time when this one was recorded. I've got some versions that were 1802 and some versions that say 1812. But she was the big recording artist back then, kind of the first Lady Gaga of the time. And this was his portable machine. He had larger machines, but this was the kind of portable one that I actually carry this one in a handbag when I carry it. So I'm going to put it back over there. Oh, one more thing. These machines actually were able to record. People think it's some sort of voodoo getting sound on it. It's not voodoo at all. Believe it or not, this machine and all record players could record. Did I say 1802? I meant 1902. You are absolutely right. This machine could record. What you do is you actually put a blank record in here, and you get a recording reproducer. They called it a reproducer, and you would sing into the horn. So I would sing, by the light of the silvery moon. And just like when I talk to you, my mouth, my tongue makes sound waves that hit your eardrum. What happens when you hit a drum? Makes a noise. So instead of hitting your eardrum, you could hit tin, or you could hit Plato. Not Plato, he was a big Greek guy. Or you could hit wax. So you would sing into the horn, and actually, your flat records, they always say into the groove. That's because the flat records had a groove, a spiral that went to the center, and the needle followed that spiral all the way to the center, and it kind of wore out the grooves while it was doing that. This record is a little more resilient. Someone was asking about scratches. If I scratch this record, it will actually still play because it's actually following a screw in the back. So if you scratch the record, it'll still play because it's following the screw. Of course, if you scratch the screw, then you're in trouble. But the record only holds the music, and that makes it less. It doesn't deteriorate as fast as a flat record where it's following the groove and it's playing the groove. So it wears out that groove faster. And that's why your records, and when you scratch the record, it'll skip in the flat records because it's following the groove and playing the groove. While with this one, it's following the groove in the back and just playing the record. I mean, obviously it still has to follow, across. So you would sing into it, and it actually goes up and down as opposed to side to side. So you would sing into it, and let me get a record here. So I would say something like hello. But when you play it back, hello, it's just moving air the same way that my mouth, my tongue moves air. I make lots of noises with my mouth. Ask my mother, she'll tell you. So all the noises that I'm making and all the noises you're making are just sound waves flying around the room, hitting your eardrum. So instead of hitting your eardrum, it hits the record. So yeah, the first record players could record. So I'm going to put this one back over here. And I'm going to take a quick look at the thingy here. The flat records competed with Edison for quite a long time. Until about 1929, actually. And Edison even made his own flat records that were called diamond discs that still went up and down. And he felt his quality was better, and he really believed in it and continued. The thing is, the flat records stack better, and they also held more music. And once flat records became double-sided, that was it. He couldn't compete with that, because these records, these cylinders, the first ones were only 2 minutes, and then the later ones, like this one, were only 4 minutes. So if your song was "Hey Jude," you were done at the chorus. While flat records, are much more than 4 minutes. So yeah, that was another reason why it basically beat him out, even with his flat records. So the next thing I have to show you, what do you suppose that is? So this was called a Regina or a Calliope, and it's basically also or a music box. It's kind of three things. It's a cross between a record player, a music box, because it's a box that plays music, and it's kind of like a player piano also, because it had these records, and that's one of the Calliope records, that had holes in it. So these holes would grab hooks. It was kind of like a player piano. So it would grab hooks, and each hook would be a different note. And I actually have about 12 records for this one. I'm going to play you one. So everyone pretend you're grabbing that. And you would wind this up. So if your sister didn't play piano, if your brother didn't play guitar, this was music for hundreds of years. This one is from the 1880s, but it goes back 100 to 400 years. They were called Regina or Calliope machine. Now the only thing is, this device, which is basically 400-year-old technology, inspired something very modern. And I'm not sure if you've heard of this extremely modern device that this 400-year-old technology inspired. And Veronica, I'm so sorry to expose your audience to this new device, this new technology that 400-year-old technology inspired, because now when COVID is over and the library opens again, all these people are going to require you to buy one of these. And you guys are going to have to, even during COVID, you're going to have to increase your budget and get one of these devices. So I'm sorry to have to mention this extremely modern device that I'm not sure anyone has actually heard of. Have you heard of the computer? Huh, you've heard of the computer, haven't you? Well, that device inspired, believe it or not, inspired the computer, because does anyone remember these? Does anyone know what these are? These are computer punch cards. Yep, you're right. And looks a little bit similar. It has the same holes as the Calliope machine's holes, the Regina machine's holes. Yeah, we think of computers as software, electronic. But the truth is, think of the word. A computer is a computing machine, a mechanical machine. And that's what it was originally. So when I was a little kid, my sister used to go to Queens College here in New York, and then after that, Columbia University. And she actually would come home with these punch cards. And she'd put it in the machine, and the machine would suck in the card, shoot, 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 shoot. And then rather than playing music, it would program the computer with, let's say, her name, Connie, and then maybe the classes she took at Columbia, and maybe her social security number. Oh, I should cover that. No, I'm kidding. So this would program the computer. These were computer programs as well, not just programming it with, let's say, her dissertation or her name and her classes. You could also buy Microsoft Word. I mean, they didn't have Microsoft Word then, but you would buy, a typing program, or even a computer game would come with a stack of these. So it would suck in the cards, and I remember once I dropped the cards on the floor, and all the cards fell all over the place and got mixed up. And she said, "Oh my God, you mixed up my program." And I'm like, "What?" It's kind of like cutting the binding of a book and taking all the pages and throwing them all over the floor. If you didn't number the pages, then you didn't know what page was page 5 and what page was page 75. So now all the pages are mixed up. How would you put the book back together? You almost couldn't. So same thing with computer programs. If you had, a game, Pac-Man or Fortnite, and you dropped it on all the cards on the floor, you would mix up the game. And I actually have punch card rolls that were computer games. I even have Star Trek on paper with holes in it, believe it or not. Let me pick up this one before my sister complains again that I dropped them on the floor. So, believe it or not, this 400-year-old technology inspired the computer. Original computers were using punch cards. The Loom, the Calliope, all those early programmable machines were the inspiration for the modern computer. So I'm going to put this one back over here, and my sock. And then, what do you suppose that is? Any ideas? Oh my God, that's the most creative answer I've ever heard. A garlic press. I love that. Wow. You are definitely a possible inventor someday. This is actually the world's smallest record player. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the world's smallest record player, the Mighty Tiny. It's from around 1968. And are you ready to go ooh and ah? Because this is the world's smallest record. Yep, there it is, the world's smallest record. Fits in the palm of your hand, and it held about 30 seconds of cheesy music. Something like Coney Island Sideshow or Tijuana Brass, which isn't that cheesy. Everyone likes Tijuana Brass. And I actually have the record sleeves. It actually came in these cute little record sleeves. This is the rock and roll collection. How cool is that? And of course, you guys all know those famous rock and roll stars. And a pack like this would cost about 34 cents for a pack of 4 of these records. And it was kind of a kid's toy back then, a fun kid's toy. One of my favorites. I actually have about 100 records for that record player. And I have about 4 or 5 records. And like I said, most of it was pretty cheesy. So here's my next device. What do you suppose that is? What does that look like? You're probably going, a Volkswagen little, bus, minivan, van thing, car from McDonald's Happy Meal. I always like to say I'm one French fry short of a Happy Meal. A pencil sharpener. Oh my God, that's a great idea. I love that. A flashlight. Wow, that's good. No one's ever said a flashlight. Okay, you're not going to believe it. It's not any of those things. It's a record player. Yep, this is a record player. It was called the Sound Wagon, and it had a needle on the bottom. So you would put your record on the table, and this would drive around your record, and the needle would play the record as it was driving on the record. How cool is that? Yep, it was from the early 1970s. It was called the Sound Wagon, and of course, you never wanted to put a really good record underneath this thing, because after this thing drove around your record, basically your record was roadkill. Yeah. So you definitely didn't want to put anything you liked under it. It was actually nicknamed the record killer back in the 1970s because it killed most of the records that it drove on. But I just thought it was such a funny, cool idea. And I heard actually somebody had the smart idea to make them again. So now you can buy them again on the internet. So remember we said that you could record on records. Believe it or not, you could record on flat records too. They actually had machines in the early to mid 1900s called recordettes. And it was a big wood machine, like about this big. And it had two arms. So one arm could play the record, but the other arm cut a groove. So you could make your own records. Well, wait a second. You know, the Russians, they didn't like our culture. So they banned it. But, you know, kids always find a way to bootleg, right? You know, Napster, the dark web. So they smuggled in these recordettes into communist Russia. But wait, where do you get a blank record in communist Russia? Well, where else? The hospital. The hospital. Yep, they went to hospitals. They took x-ray paper. They cut the x-ray paper into circles, and they recorded their favorite pop music on people's x-rays. Yep, they recorded their favorite pop music on people's x-rays. And so they nicknamed them Bones and Ribs Records. So clearly that would be an interesting thing, wouldn't it? So clearly I should add it to the Museum of Interesting Things. Well, I had them flown in from Russia just for you. And there it is, the Bones and Ribs record from Russia. And there you have it, somebody's skull. And if you look closely, you'll see that it has grooves. It's also a record, besides being an x-ray of somebody's skull. How cool is that? And in fact, I have the Holy Grail. I have the King himself on Bones and Ribs Records. I have Elvis Presley on Bones and Ribs Records. And I have the master himself. I have Louis Armstrong on Bones and Ribs Records. And yes, booths in Coney Island did it. And there was a booth in the Empire State Building. You actually remember the booths that did it, Amy? That's impressive. If you have any of those, let me know. I'd love to get one. I have some of the ones from the Empire State Building. They actually made them up on the observation deck, and they were called observation deck records. Some people did them. There was a place on 46th Street. They were called speakerphone records often. And people always ask me if I've ever played these. The kids played them all the time, but I don't want to deteriorate it because, as you know, the needle cuts a groove into it. So I'm going to digitize them, and then I'm going to put them up on our website, and you'll get to hear the actual Bones and Ribs records. You'll get to hear the Elvis Presley, the Louis Armstrong, and everything I have on the website. I don't know, I guess Veronica put the website into the chat there so people can go on the website, and then if you send me an email, then I'll let you, then I'll put you on our email list because I actually have one of those recordettes. And we do a speakeasy once a month. And we're going to do a speakeasy where you can bring your x-rays, or I'll have x-rays, and you could record on your own Bones and Ribs. So, or you could record on somebody else's Bones and Ribs. Just make sure to wear a mask so you don't get any COVID from their Bones and Ribs records. But yeah, we're going to actually have a speakeasy where we're going to make our own Bones and Ribs, and you'll be able to record. So already you can give me some ideas of what you would record on your own Bones and Ribs. So let me know. I love hearing the interesting ideas people come up with. I had a Russian guy who actually came to the museum and said he used to make these as a kid. And I said, oh my God, that's so cool. I never heard of anyone making them. I know some Russians that remember it or heard about them, but never one who actually made them. And he goes, oh yeah, kids did it all the time. It's kind of like telling an American, back in the day, Americans used to bootleg by burning these things called CDs. It's like, yeah, we know what burning a CD is. But imagine in 20 years, kids are going to go, you set fire to something? I was like, no, it was a laser. You shot lasers onto something? It wasn't that exciting. It's not Star Wars, burning a CD. But to them, instead of CDs or tape decks, they would record on X-ray paper. That was the bootlegging technique. And I asked him, how long did you do this? And he said, oh, up until the late 70s. He said, oh my God, I thought they stopped in like the 50s or 60s. And I thought, wait a second, if they were doing this till the 70s, forget Elvis Presley. The Beatles were popular then, the Rolling Stones. So I actually have the Rolling Stones. I have the Beatles on Bones and Ribs records. And I even have, for the more geek crowd, I have Sonny and Cher. And for the cool crowd, I've got Pink Floyd on Bones and Ribs records. And like I said, you guys will be able to make your own Bones and Ribs records once we open up, once the world opens up and we can actually do it. Okay, so I'm gonna move this table. I'm gonna keep the table over there just in case. But I'm gonna ask you guys, what do you suppose that is? Oh, for the person who asked who was that, Jill, the quality wasn't that great because obviously you're playing it kind of just as a loudspeaker onto the record, and the record was an X-ray paper. So the quality wasn't great, but at least they could hear their favorite bands. So they were happy to have anything, and it was very, very dangerous. The communists were not happy about this. So you could go to jail, you could disappear if with this kind of thing. So you wanted to be careful with these Bones and Ribs. I like that idea. A puppet. I could see it as a puppet. Mwah, 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 mwah. This is actually a flash. Yep, this is a magnesium flash or a black powder flash for a camera. So you would get black powder, which that's 100-year-old black powder. And you would put your black powder in here, which was magnesium powder, the same kind of magnesium that's in your body. That's what's powering your body, the electrical signal. So you would put black powder in here, and then you would advance this little thing like that. And then there's a button right over there, so everyone press that button, and it would go poof. And then you would have a flash, and you would take a picture of that. You would take a picture using the light from the flash. I like to show this one first because people don't guess it right away. The one I like to show afterwards is this one. This is the one you would have seen in those old-time movies where the guy had one of those old-fashioned cameras, kind of like this camera. Hold on, I'll get it. Kind of like one of these cameras. And then they would have a flash like this. And if you ever watched Bugs Bunny or the Addams Family or something, they'd always have this giant pile of black powder on here. If you put that much black powder, you would have blown your heads off. You want just a little bit of flash powder here, kind of like a magician would have some flash powder and make a flash. So you would have a little bit of black powder here. And what is this thing? It's basically a lighter. You're just making a spark and sparking the black powder, the magnesium powder, and taking a picture using the flash. Now we look at this and we go, my God, that's barbaric. You're blowing something up to take a picture of this poor audience over here. Well, what do you think you're doing now with your cell phones? You're doing the same thing. You're using the electricity in your cell phone to make a flash, an explosion in your cell phone. You're still blowing things up. And you remember those old cameras that had a flash bulb? Well, that's a light bulb that blows up. A flash bulb. You're still blowing things up to take pictures. We think our technology is so modern. Nah, your iPad the iPhones. Those are just sound waves hitting your eardrum, um, and the flash in your camera is just an explosion in your cell phone. So that's an interesting device. Any ideas of what that would be? Any thoughts? Ooh, you're close, Jill. We're going to discuss that in a second. You're close. This is actually a steam engine. Um, so, and I know a lot of people come up with all sorts of interesting ideas that see any, or a furnace. I could see that because you see the fire and everything. One girl thought it was a light switch. I thought that was the coolest answer. It would be a very steampunk light switch, and I'm part of the steampunk community, so I would totally groove on that. That would sell. And I never tell people, oh, that's a wrong answer, because the truth is, there's no such thing as a wrong answer. Because that's what inventors do. They look at a thing like this and they go, well, I don't need a steam engine, but I could use a furnace. So they invent a furnace. Or I don't need a steam engine, I need a lantern. And then they use the same kind of technology and invent a lantern. Or, a light switch. I thought that was a great idea, a steam engine light switch. But this was a steam engine. There was a company, the Whedon company, which made this one. And they made these steam engines and put them in their catalog as kind of like a promotional thing. And a lot of times the railroad companies loved these things because it taught kids how steam power worked. So basically, what are you doing here? And often when I describe this thing, now if you're sitting on your sofa and there's someone sitting next to you, I want you to give them a little push. Yeah. And then I want the person sitting next to you to push you back. Okay, you did that? Great. And now push them back. Okay, great. And now have them push you back. Okay, and now push them back, and then have them push you, and then push them back, and have them push you. I just like doing this because I love making, virtual chaos. No, I'm kidding. What I'm showing is what a steam engine does. Basically, what a car does, what anything does. You're basically pushing stuff. We think this stuff is all complicated and only engineers can think of it. But really, what are we doing? You're just pushing stuff. When we think of green energy, we all go, yes, green energy. I'm all for it. But you never go, I can think of the next green energy device. You always go, some engineer can do it. But the truth is, what is green energy? You're finding a different way to push something. So you could have a horse, and he'll pull the carriage, or you could push each other, or you could push your car, or you could have this stuff called gasoline and have a spark plug. What do you think a spark plug does? It sparks something and blows up the gasoline, a combustion engine. So you're just blowing something up to move wheels, a combustion engine. Just like a gun where you have the bullet and you have gunpowder and you're blowing something up to move it out of, to move the bullet out of the gun. You're just pushing stuff. So what is happening with this? You've got water, and then you've got this thing. That's why you were guessing a furnace. So you would light that, and it would heat up the water. And what happens when you heat water? You get steam, and you use that energy to move this wheel. But you could use anything to move stuff. So I could go, wind energy. I hope you were all wearing your mask as I was blowing into your cell phones and computers because, you don't want any particles. You don't want COVID. Wind energy, like the sail of a ship. Or think of anything that moves. Go ahead. Give me some ideas of what moves. Anything that moves you can use for energy. Let's see. Some people have come up with some great ideas. Any thoughts? Anything that moves. I did this in New Jersey. Wheels. In fact, Some people go, well, wait a second. The whole point is you're finding energy to move the wheels. No, actually, someone got smart to this. He realized, I was reading one of these NASA magazines, and someone realized that the wheels on the road are moving and making friction on the road. So they're making smart roads where the road collects that energy and creates energy. And so smart roads are imagine how many cars are driving on the roads now. Yeah, the movement of the airplane could also, could also generate some power. And even when the car is moving, as the wheels are turning, it's actually also putting some juice into your battery. It's charging the battery a little bit. They're using that as well. There was a little girl in New Jersey who her friend laughed at her, and I said, "What did you say?" And she said, "Oh, no, I don't want to tell you." And I said, "No, you can tell me." And she was scared now because there's 300 people in the room, and actually, Channel 13 PBS was there filming that show, so she did not want to be on camera saying what she said, and her friend laughed at her. And I said, "No, you can trust me. I promise." And even the principal was there. So I said, "I promise I will not laugh at you. What did you say?" And she said, "Well, you said anything that moves." And I said to my friend, "Eyelid." And I thought, oh my God, that's brilliant. And the guy from PBS came right up to my face with the camera. He goes, "I've never seen you so amazed." I said, because think about it. How many people just blinked watching this? And then imagine how many people just blinked all over America. If you harnessed the blinking of an eye for energy, the blinking of everybody's eye right now could probably power the library. So you guys would be the most green energy library in the world if you used the blinking eyes of your patrons. How cool would that be? Or, someone once said a dog's tail. Instead of, you could have a dog farm outside of the library, and you could have the dog's tails wagging in the wind, powering the lights in the library. Of course, I'm sure PETA, the people against the ethical treatment of animals, yeah, I don't think PETA would appreciate that. So you might get a nasty phone call. Perhaps we shouldn't use it quite that way. Let me see what this. The boy who hammered the wind. Oh wow, that sounds interesting. I'll have to check that out. And yes, of course, solar power, which we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later. So let me put this guy away and this guy away. I move this over here. And then I've got a question for you before I start my next one. Have you guys ever seen a 3D movie, 3D photography, anything 3D? How long do you think we've had 3D? What do you think? How many years? 5 years? 10 years? 20 years? What do you think? Give me a guess. The 3D printer, 1957. Everyone always goes to the 50s because, those old cheesy movies, which I wrote a whole article, 50 years. Well, we haven't had photography for two. I'm going to give you a hint. Who is this guy? Who's that guy? Everyone's working really quick to type the name. I did a school in Manhattan, and all the kids went, "Barack Obama." And I was like, no. Who is this guy? And they all went, "Barack Obama." And all the teachers covered their faces going, "Yeah, we don't know these kids. They just came in off the street." and and one kid at least got close. He said, Washington. And I was like, well, that's at least in the era of like old. But yeah, that's Abraham Lincoln, and that is a stereo view for a stereoscope of Abraham Lincoln, which means we've had 3D since at least Abraham Lincoln. And in fact, we've had 3D even longer than Abraham Lincoln, because obviously, if we're taking 3D pictures of the guy, it must have come out earlier than that. So, yep, we've had it even earlier. In fact, I researched it, and I had our librarian friends research it, and I worked with the 3D Society. And we found out that 3D Photography began in the beginning with photography. As soon as we had photography in around 1839, they had these things called daguerreotypes. And as soon as they started doing photography, cameras, they started making cameras kind of like this one, 3D, 3 lenses. So raise your hand if you have 3 eyes. What's the third lens doing? What do you think that lens does? Come on, what do you think? Why 3? You only have 2 eyes. What's the third lens doing? Any thoughts? Who said that? Amy? It's actually taking your soul. No, it's not taking your soul. We'll discuss that later. This one is for focusing, because you never want to focus on your right eye because it sees it to the right. And you never want to focus on your left eye because it sees it to the left. You want to focus on the center. For example, when you guys are looking at me, are you seeing me, one of me or 2? You are actually all seeing 2 of me. And your brain puts the 2 images together. Try this trick. Everyone try this. Put your thumb in front of your face like that. Go ahead. And then close one eye. And then close the other eye. Switch back and forth. Your thumb is moving, but you're not moving it. That's because your right eye sees your thumb a little to the right, and your left eye sees your thumb a little to the left, and your brain puts the 2 thumbs together. There's a theory, now it's only a theory, that when you were born, you saw 2 mommies and 2 daddies and 2 doctors. And eventually you realized that asking permission 4 times would be dreadful, so you put the parents together. No, I'm kidding. You put everyone together because you realized there wasn't 2 of everything. So you put them together, your brain puts it together, your eyes see 2. And that's how 3D works. You're seeing a little bit from the right, a little bit from the left, so you see the depth, the curvature, and you put it together. This was a stereoscope, a stereo view, and it's each image is a little bit to the other side. And you would put it inside one of these devices that somebody was talking about before, the stereoscope. So that is an original 1880s stereoscope, and on it is a stereo view of the Flatiron Building here on 23rd Street in New York City. So you would put this into your eyes like that and move it like this, and you'll see a 3D image of the Flatiron Building. And did you get my really bad Coney Island joke? It's a 3D image of the Flatiron Building. Get it? 3D Flatiron. Yeah. Can you tell I worked at Coney? So you guys would look inside there, and you probably not get much of a view like this, but I'll try to get it kind of, and then you would focus it in like that and see your 3D image. And this was kind of the first Google, the first YouTube of the 1800s, because your parents would buy a pack of 25 of these, and you'd learn about New York or France or the Civil War. But you notice on the back, it would have text. So that was your Googling. So this was your YouTube, and that was your Googling. Because back then, it was expensive to buy a book. And I know you guys are all here because of a library, but there weren't libraries all over the place. We're lucky to have free libraries everywhere. And books were expensive, and traveling to France to see France was expensive. So you bought a pack of 25 of these, and that's how you learned about New York or France or the Civil War. They had Great World War. They had Great World War I packages where you buy this whole thing. I think it was almost 100 of them. The big one was 100, and you would learn about World War I. Around World War II, it kind of wasn't as popular. These became popular up until around World War II. But they were a huge sensation during the late 1800s when the stereoscope was invented by a guy called Wagon. So the next device I have to show you, the next thing, is kind of the beginning of photography, silhouettes. So we're a little bit going backwards. I always think of silhouettes as kind of being this cheesy method of doing things. But if you think about it, in the late, I think it was the late 1700s. Yeah, it was the late 1700s. Somebody had developed a device to make silhouettes, this machine. And it became hugely popular because it was expensive. Otherwise, there was no photography. Otherwise, you'd have to have an oil painter do an oil painting of you. You're not going to do that every year. You're not going to do that every 3 years. You, if you want to take pictures of your kids as they're growing up, you can't. There's no pictures. And you're not going to do an oil painting, which is expensive, of your kid when he's 5 and 10 and 15 of the whole family. That's expensive. So people would do silhouettes, which was kind of a cheap way. And this was a machine that you would, kind of stand next to the machine, and it had kind of a screen. And the screen would create and they had a candle, and that would create a silhouette. And someone would trace you. And then there was another, it had like a bunch of, another like arm type thing with gears, and then another arm would do a copy of it. It's kind of the first copy machine, and it would do a copy of it in a smaller form below or above, and it would trace it, and that would create a silhouette image, and at least you'd have some sort of remembrance of your kid when they were young. So the silhouettes were the first photography, but even before that, you had one of these. Any idea of what that would be? So this is a camera obscura, or a box camera, or a pinhole camera. And these go back hundreds of years. Yep, camera obscura. They go back hundreds of years. And this one is from the late 1800s. It's a British version of it. And basically, it's the first photography. So it's basically a box with a hole. And your image would come in through there and then come out. You'd see it on the back here on plastic or glass. This is glass. And then you'd put trace paper here. And you trace the image yourself. It's before photography. So you're doing all the work. You're the negative, you're the camera, you're the print, you're doing all the work, you're tracing the image yourself. And they feel that fine artists would have used this kind of as a guide to do, their paintings. And yes, they feel that Vermeer, actually there's this whole documentary on the fact that maybe Vermeer cheated, and he didn't just use it as a guide. His paintings were tracings, and they used camera obscuras to do the paintings, and that's why the detail was so good. In fact, you'll notice during the time, especially during the Renaissance, all the paintings all of a sudden become a lot more detailed, and they feel that perhaps that's because of the camera obscura, either inspiring them or them just using camera obscuras and tracing the images. All of those artists are dead, so we can't ask them. And I hate demonizing people that are dead and saying, you did this, because God only knows what they did. But they definitely knew about these, and they used them as a guide. Now, I've got a question for you. When this camera obscura sees you, and in fact, when all of you see me, are you seeing me right side up or upside down? And yes, you're right. Tracing takes a lot of art skill as well. I could not trace as well as Picasso or Monet or Van Gogh. They definitely trace better than me, or Vermeer. So yes, you are actually seeing me upside down. You're absolutely correct. And your brain flips it back. Now, some people don't know this at all. Some people know this for sure. Some people heard about it, but they're like, I don't know, I kind of heard about this, but I'm not sure. But one thing's for sure, most people can't explain it in any way, shape, or form. And when I first got the camera obscura and learned about this on the web, and in books, it would always say the physics of light and show you a bunch of math and a bunch of graphs. And I was like, oh my God. So when I taught kids, I would say the physics of light and move on quickly before they asked me that horrible question, why? And then I would have to actually know why. But then one day, a woman came to, I do shows in my space on Broadway, and a woman came up to me and said, I call them the apartment shows, and she said, Denny, you explain things so comfortably. You remind me of a quote Einstein said that I'd never heard before. Einstein said something like, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't know it well enough. And I thought, challenge accepted. And then I thought, I'm telling people the physics of light, and I can't say that to a 6-year-old. So after she left, I got on the internet, I read every book, every article, everything I could read. I said, I'm not leaving the room until I know this well enough to explain to a 6-year-old. And I could read the math and the graphs and all that, because one of my majors at NYU was actually economics, so I could read all the math. But you know what? You don't need the math. You don't need the graphs. You don't need the physics of light. Do you know what you need? You need a piece of string. Yep. All you need is a piece of string and everybody in this room's foot. Something is clearly a foot. So all of you, I want you to pretend to step on this string. So I'd put it on the floor and you all step on the string. And then when you see it from the side of a camera obscura, you'll understand why. So the image from your head to your toe is going into my camera obscura and into my eye upside down. Why? Well, the image of your foot are all your feet on the floor? I just want to make sure. Is everyone's foot on the floor or on the ceiling? Okay, try to, if your foot's on the ceiling, please put it back down on the floor for me now, because we need your foot on the floor. Okay, so if your foot's on the floor and you're stepping on this string, then the string would go up, right? When you see it from the side of the camera obscura, you'll understand why you see upside down. So the string goes up, goes up, goes up. And when it gets up over here, where is it? On top of my box or on the bottom of the box? It's obviously on the top. And that's why your foot from the floor ends up on the top of the box. And then the light from the ceiling comes down, right? So the light comes down, comes down, comes down in a straight line, just like my string. So it comes down like this, and when it gets to the back of my box, where is it? On top or on bottom? On the bottom. And that's why you see upside down. Because everyone there, your head, your eye, is just a box camera. Yep, it's just a box with a hole in it. Now, hopefully there's a brain in there too, but that's not my problem. That's your wife, your husband, your teacher, your boss. For my purposes, your head, your eye is a box camera. So the light would go up like this, and it would go up to the top of your head. It would go through your eye, and the floor, the image of the floor goes to the top of your head, and the image from the ceiling goes through the ceiling, and when it goes through my eye, and when it gets to the back of my head, it ends up on the bottom because it's going down. And that's why you see upside down, because the image of the floor goes up and the image of the ceiling goes down. Now you guys know more than 99.9% of the population of this country. Most people don't even know that you see upside down and your brain flips it back. The few people that know can't explain it to a 6-year-old. All you need is a piece of string and somebody's foot. So you just have to borrow some foot somewhere. Something's clearly a foot. So that's how the camera obscura works. Somebody had mentioned the lantern. And of course, ask and you shall receive in this show. There it is. A magic lantern. That is a magic lantern from about 100 years ago. And what's a magic lantern? It's a projector. Yep. These are the first projectors, in fact. And they actually, because it goes back, this one is about 100 years old, and they go back 100 to maybe several hundred years old. So that's before light bulbs. So what's it using for light? An oil lamp. So that is the original oil lamp in this one. This was a kid's toy from about 100 years ago, because clearly kids should be playing with oil lamps. It's before the government stepped in and realized that's not a good idea. So yeah, you would light your match, and then you would have glass slides, because these go back before photography. So you would use a glass slide like this one. That is an original 1880s Ernst Planck glass slide, and you'd paint a picture on it. Good. So you'd paint a picture of, let's say, a monster or a dragon or your great grandma. And then all you guys would come into this Zoom chat, into this room, and I would light my match and I'd put in my glass slide and I would project onto the wall, and you'd go, oh my God, it's a monster, it's a dragon, it's my great grandma. And all of you guys would run and scream out of this room and go, Denny showed me monsters and dragons and great grandma. And that's why they called these things magic lanterns. Because imagine 100 years ago, or worse yet, imagine 400 years ago, people seeing an image on the wall. They thought it was ghosts. They thought it was, spirits. They thought it was magical. And that's why they called these things magic lanterns. But they were actually used as storytelling devices. So the library would have a storyteller show up, and they'd bring glass slides, and they would tell the story of Mother Goose, or Aesop's Fables, or Jack and the Beanstalk. But it was also used as, and watch Veronica laugh, the first PowerPoint presentation. And it was the first PowerPoint presentation. Replace the word PowerPoint with magic lantern. Thomas Edison himself had magic lantern presentations that you could buy out of a catalog. Yep, PowerPoint did not invent this. And in fact, I couldn't believe that that was true, so I ran out and I got you a 100-year-old catalog. That is an original catalog of lantern slides, and the subjects for these are historical. So in this catalog, you guys would appreciate this. Look how many existed before PowerPoint. This is PowerPoint before PowerPoint. There are 3 columns, and every line is a magic lantern presentation, a historical magic lantern presentation, PowerPoint before PowerPoint. And in this book alone, you can tell there's hundreds, if not thousands. And they had tons of catalogs. I have 4 or 5 catalogs myself. So PowerPoint did not invent this. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of them coming out every single year. And in fact, I'm planning on doing a Magic Lantern speakeasy online soon. So I'll email you guys and let you know. Send me an email. I'll email you guys and let you know. We're going to be doing a Magic Lantern presentation where I have a Disney one. I actually have the original glass slides that are Disney slides, just like these, from around 100 years ago. But the Magic Lantern had a third purpose: to bring back the dead. Yep, your great grandma. They used them in seances, and they pretended to bring great grandma back. Somebody would have an image on the wall, and they'd go, "Oh my God, it's grandma!" And she'd go, "Well, it's good to see you." There's a guy that believed in this spirit photography. There's a guy that believed in this spirit photography to such an extent that he actually wrote a whole book on it, The Case for Spirit Photography. And this writer, and in fact, his books are in the library. Because the writer that believed in spirit photography was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The writer of Sherlock Holmes believed in the case for spirit photography. He wrote this whole book as a case defending this spirit photography. He really believed this is true. And he actually wrote 5 books on the subject, and I got all 5 books. This is a first edition from around 1920, I believe 1923 or 1922. So there it is, the title page. And look, you guys you gotta believe. Because look right there. I mean, do you not see a ghost right behind those two people? I mean, is this not clearly photographic evidence of ghosts living among us? And look right over here. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, do you not see a ghost right behind that woman right there? I mean, is this not photographic evidence that when I take a picture of you, there's a ghost of your great grandma hanging out right behind you? And when I print that picture, it comes out in the photographic evidence. And clearly, ladies and gentlemen, if it's in this book, it must be true. Just like if it's on the internet, it must be true. Not so much. Yeah. What's going on here? It's basically double exposure photography. You've got a picture of you, you've got a picture of your grandma, your great grandma, and you put the two pictures together, and you've got your great grandma hanging out right behind you. It's double exposure photography. But Conan Doyle really believed this. I read this book twice because I just couldn't believe it. And it really is he uses his Sherlock Holmes scientific method to prove that every one of those pictures is real and they're actually spirits. He was there for all the stages of the photographic process, from loading the camera all the way to printing the picture. Every bit of the process he was there for, and sometimes he even had magicians and scientists and everything there in the room to prove that this was all real. So he wrote these things very well. I mean, it's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and he really believed this. There's a guy that didn't believe in it. There's a guy and some of you have already guessed, I'm seeing there, who didn't believe in it to such an extent. Oh my God, you guys are screaming it out at me. And you're right. Houdini, the great magician Houdini, clearly knows trickery. So the story goes like this. Basically, it was his mom passed away. He was very close to his mom. He was famous. He didn't get to say goodbye. And so, he went to one of these seances in the hope that he could say one last goodbye to his mom. And, I always like to think of myself, if you're going to trick Harry Houdini, what is the first thing you should do? You should do your homework. You should go to the library or research or do something. The guy did nothing. So he brings Harry Houdini into the room, and he brings his mother into the room, and his mom goes, Harry, it's good to see you. I miss you, Harry. I love you, Harry. And Harry goes, there's one problem with this picture. My mother didn't speak English. She was Jewish, and she spoke Yiddish, not English. She would have spoken to me in Yiddish. Yeah. The guy didn't even get the language right. Yeah. Oh, my God. I think the proper word for that would have been, I think the Yiddish word would have been schmuck. Yeah. Not a good idea to get the language wrong. And Harry Houdini, you guys are right, got really angry about this. Because he said, look, I'm a magician. When you come to my show, clearly these are tricks. I didn't saw a woman in half, and a rabbit didn't come out of my empty hat. There was a rabbit in the hat the whole time, and the woman is completely whole inside the box. It's a trick. It's all magic. But these people, these spiritualists, they're telling you they brought back your great-grandma, your grandma, your wife, your mother. They're using your heart to take your money. And he said, that's unethical. And you know what? I was so touched by this story. I thought it was such a beautiful story. He really made it his life's mission to go to these seances and debunk them. He went all over the world doing this. And in fact, there's a hysterical story where it's told that he would actually carry tacks with him, because often these guys would have ghosts going through the room wearing sheets, going through the room barefoot. So he would throw tacks on the floor. And there was this famous guy who used to bring back Caesar and have Caesar walk through the room going, I am Caesar. And then, so Houdini threw tacks on the floor, and the guy stepped on the tack, and he was German, and he started cursing in German, going, oh my God, I stepped on a towel, And then, of course, everyone realized that it's the guy, tricking everybody. And of course, he was proven to be a scam. And that was like Harry Houdini's thing. He was really good at, at debunking these guys. In fact, he even had a reward out that if anyone brought back the dead, he would give them a large sum of money. And of course, nobody ever won that money. And Harry Houdini was actually friends with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And even they fought about this. Yep, they fought about this pretty harshly. So much that they actually unfriended each other on Facebook. Yeah, no, there was no Facebook. But in fact, today I'm going to prove to you that they did not unfriend each other on Facebook. Because, and you librarians are going to be jealous, I know you're already jealous that I have the first edition copy of that, but I also have the first edition copy of Harry Houdini's book. His response to the case for spirit photography was a magician among the spirits. Clearly a jab at his friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But here is definitive proof that the man stayed friends. He did not unfriend him on Facebook. Because if you go to the title page of Harry Houdini's book, and there it is, the title page, he has a picture. And there it is, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle standing right next to Harry Houdini. Friends. In fact, Harry Houdini is quoted as saying that, yeah, we disagreed, but I respected his opinion, and we're still friends. And they stayed friends. And I think it's just such a cool story that I got a first edition copy of Harry Houdini's book. And actually, I have several copies of each of the books because I just think it's so cool that they thought about this, but they stayed friends, which is probably one of my favorite of the stories in the museum. The next item I had to show you is a praxinoscope. And a praxinoscope is kind of like a zoetrope. It's an early animation device from around 1879 or so. And it's basically using, now with a zoetrope, you had slits like this and pictures, and you would spin it. With this one, you have mirrors, and you look in the mirrors, and you'll see the animation. And this animation was actually made for me by Pixar. I did a lecture a couple of years ago at Pixar, and since I didn't have an animation from the 1880s, they made an animation that looks like an 1880s animation right in the Pixar offices. And they did it in, I think I had less than 10 minutes to my lecture, and they made it in less than 10 minutes. And I said, "Are you sure you can do this?" And they said, "You realize you're at Pixar. We know how to do this. We know how to make animation." But what is animation? What is a moving image? What are you looking at when you're looking at me now? You're not seeing a moving image. You're seeing still images of me flashed before your face. Your YouTube, we think that's all modern? No. YouTube is a flip book. Just like that is a flip book. Just like you're looking at me, you're looking at a flip book. Everything is a flip book. You've never seen a moving image in your lives. All you've seen is still images flashed before your face. And so someone creative came up with these zoetropes and these praxinoscopes to illuminate, pun intended, how animation works, to illuminate, to show a moving image, to kind of trick your eye into seeing a moving image. We all grew up with these, yes? So if you don't know what that is, it is a Viewmaster, and they were invented around 1939. And it was actually two guys that went like rock climbing. And one guy said, instead of having cards, stereoscope cards, why not have a wheel? And as the wheel turns, you'll see a different 3D image. So you'd look inside there and you'd see, a 3D image. And we all grew up with these wheels, these Viewmaster reels. And if you didn't, get one because they're fun. But did you know that they made a talking Viewmaster? Yep, they made a talking Viewmaster. And I thought, how's it talk? And I emailed the guy 200 times and tortured him. And he said, it's going to arrive, you'll understand. Because he said there's a record. And I'm like, what kind of record? How's that work? Where's the record? Where's the pictures? And he goes, they're together. And I'm like, what? How's that work? Well, I got it. And it's right here. And there's the reel of pictures that we all know and love. And on the back, there's a record. So you put it in a larger machine, the Talking Viewmaster, which looked like that. And it would play the record while you were watching the 3D images, the Talking Viewmaster. And believe it or not, this was around, and I know you're thinking, when did this come out? Your grandparents would have a small plastic thing, and you looked inside, you saw a picture. Can't remember what it was called. That was the Viewmaster. But the talking one, I've met very few people that remember that. Let me know if any of you remember the Talking Viewmaster, because it was around for all our childhoods. It was around in the 60s, it was around in the 70s, and it was around in the 80s, because I have the holy grail of Talking Viewmasters. I have Michael Jackson's Thriller on Talking Viewmaster. How cool is that? So clearly it was around in the 80s, because I've got Thriller, which I consider the holy grail, or the thrilling one to have. One of my favorite ones. Let's see what you're... It was still 3D. There were pictures all around the reels. So all of you have cell phones, right? Excellent. If you were alive 100 years ago, now close your eyes. I'll show you. But first, close your eyes. Okay, now open your eyes. This is what you would have in your pocket if you were alive 100 years ago. This would be your telephone. Yep. And where would this phone be? In your pocket? Nah. In your living room? Nah. In your bedroom? No. In the kitchen? No. This phone would be in the grocery store, in the train, the railroad station, or in the post office, or in the general store. They wouldn't call it a grocery store; they call it a general store. What we think of as like a deli. And so, wait a second. How would you know you even got a phone call? Well, they would have to call. They'd have to go to your house and tell you. And how would you even make a phone call? What's missing from this phone? Well, you're missing the dial. You're missing the numbers. I had one kid said, it's missing an app. And I said, you're right, it's also missing apps. I mean, he wasn't wrong. It is missing apps. And another kid said a screen. And I said, well, technically you're also right. You're right, it doesn't have a screen. But I think the thing I'm looking for is the numbers. It's missing the numbers. So how do you make a phone call? Well, you would go like this. And I had a guy, this old guy said to me, do you know what they're doing when they do that? And I said, I don't know, but I could guess, but I think you know. And he said, yeah, what they're doing is they're waking up the operator, because there would have been one phone in the whole town, and you didn't get a lot of phone calls. So the operator was probably sleeping. So you'd wake up the operator and you'd go, let me get the phone here. You'd go, hello, operator. I need to make a phone call to Jill. And then, wait a second. How does Jill know she's even getting a phone call if this is ringing out over there? So let me put this down because it's heavy. So you would call. So in order to call Jill, you would have to call, right, the operator. And so let's say Jill is in Hoboken. I always put people in Hoboken because it's fun. So the operator here in New York would call the operator in Hoboken and go, hello, Agnes, I need to call Jill in Hoboken. And then Agnes would call the operator Gertrude, in Hoboken and wake her up probably. And then Gertrude, what would Gertrude do? Would she leave the house and tell, run over to Jill's house? I met this old guy who said, you know what I used to do as a kid? He used to hang around the candy store. And every time the guy at the candy store got a phone call, he gave this kid a dime and he would get on his bicycle right across town and tell someone they got a phone call at the candy store. So this guy made a dime for every phone call in that town. Imagine if you made a dime for every phone call in New York. You'd quit your job. You'd have a great job during COVID. That would make tons of money. Yeah, these kids would go out and they would ride their bicycles and tell people, oh, you got a phone call. So, right, you'd have to call the operator, and then the operator would have to tell someone, and the operator knew everybody in the town, so they'd have to know Jill and Francis and Veronica and everybody in the town. They'd have to know all your names and where you lived, and they would have to tell you that you got a phone call. And eventually, the town's got a lot of people, and the operator couldn't remember everybody in the town. And so some inventor, just like tying your shoe, realized we have a problem. And so they started giving people numbers. And that's where you get the numbers on the phone. Each time there's a different problem, someone comes up with a new solution. It's just like tying your shoe. So eventually you get the numbers, and there's a small amount of numbers, and eventually you have 7 numbers, and then you have an area code, and then you have to dial 1 and the area code, instead of the operator getting all of these phone calls, and it would basically inundate her with phone calls. Ooh, how much time do we have? Because now we're past 8.
I don't clock watch with these,
What?
so I don't clock watch with these. It's really up to you.
Oh, okay, good. I was like, oh my God, I thought it ends at 8. I was like, I didn't know when it ends. Okay, so, and we're almost toward the end anyway, so that's perfect. I've only got like maybe 2 or 3 items to show you guys. Something funny about the dials. I show kids the dial phones, and one 12-year-old in Long Island said to me, I've got a question. And I said, what's your question? And she goes, well, you have to dial, meaning you put your finger in there and then turn it all the way there, and then it has to go all the way back to the beginning. I said, yeah, and if you mess up, you have to do it all over again, all 7 numbers. And she's like, well, then why does 911 begin with a 9, which has the longest dial? And I thought, oh my God, that's a great question. Why? If you're on fire, the last thing you want to dial is a 9. You want to dial a 1, So I finally researched it, and we found out that the reason why 911 begins with a 9 is because we were adhering to the British system. And the British emergency, which is still the number for emergency in England, is 999. But America figured out that if you dial 3 9s and you're on fire, by the time you get to the 3rd 9, you're toast. So we figure 9 means you're serious, you have an emergency. 1 means you're on fire, come quickly. And that's why ours is 911. And I believe it started somewhere like Atlanta, Georgia, and it went very well. And then Ma Bell brought it to the entire country, and we ended up with 911. But it originally started down over there. And like I said, because of the British system. And why is the British 999? Because the British actually had a button for the 9. So you could press the button 3 times, and that was nice and quick. And we didn't do 111 because kids could possibly do 111 by accident. And why did we do it in the first place? Because the operator was getting so many emergency calls, plus every other call, that it was hard to deal with the emergencies. And they decided to have a dedicated line just for emergencies so that people wouldn't turn into toast trying to call 911. So, I wonder what this is. It's over 100 years old. It's probably late 1800s. And if you guys don't hear me well, what you would do is you'd put this in your ear and go like that, because it's a hearing aid. Exactly. Yep. It is a walking tube, a speaking tube, a hearing aid, an ear trumpet. There are lots of different names. This would be more of a walking tube because you walk down the street and go, what'd you say, Sonny? Speak up, I can't hear you. And this one is about 100 years old. Okay, so my last device, we were talking about solar power, and I brought the holy grail of solar power items, the solar space phone. Yep, the solar space phone from the early 1960s, and it actually did use solar power. So the sun's ray would come down, and then he would talk into this, and the sun's ray would turn his voice into electricity, and then that would go across there to her, and then she had a receiver that would convert the solar power back into voice, and then she would hear him. The solar space phone from 1962, as seen on Newsweek. And I love this graphic because we're talking the early 1960s. So he could talk, he could only talk, and she could only listen. You notice that part? Yeah, you gotta love it. But if you think, where do the walkie-talkies fit into this? Yeah, it's kind of like a walkie-talkie, but instead of using electricity or a battery, plugging it would use solar power. So it's kind of like a walkie-talkie, but not quite as advanced. Walkie-talkie had radio signal, and it could go through. It would go further. This one you have to be within eyeshot. But if you think the box looks cool, wait till you see the actual solar space phone. How cool is that? So I would talk into this, and then there was a mirror on the end of it. It's a little beat up, and that would reflect the light. And then the rest of you would listen with this and have these headsets on, and you would aim this at the other gun, at the other phone, and then the image would go, the solar energy would go into there. Now, of course, this wouldn't work in here because we don't have the sun. And another thing, I don't know if you've already realized, you had to be within eyeshot of the person because it had to reflect off here into there. So basically you could see her. So basically you could talk to her if she's there. So why use the solar space phone? I always thought this game was fun because it was absurd. Because there was no reason to use it because obviously you could see the person. You could just say, hi, can you hear me now? And they would hear you. So technically that's my last item, except for one thing. During this presentation, I got a couple of phone calls. And I know it's terribly rude of me to make a phone call in the middle of a presentation. But one of those phone calls could have been my mom. And you should always call your mom, right? So Veronica, all of you out there, do you mind if I just call my mother real quick? I know it's terribly rude, but you should always call your mom, right? So is it okay if I just call my mom real quick? All you guys mingle for 1 second. Okay, so hang on, I'm just gonna call my mom. Hold on, let me get my phone. Ugh. Ugh. Hi, Ma, I can't talk to you now. I'm doing a presentation. Oh, wait, did you think I would use my little cell phone? Nah, these were the first portable telephones. Yep, starting out in the 1970s, this was the attaché case telephone. And I love the fact that it was rotary. And you would have to carry this around if you wanted to make a phone call back then. Yep, this one is probably from the late 70s, early 80s. It was considered a portable telephone. And basically, what is it using? What is your cell phone now using? They're basically radios. Even your cell phone is a glorified radio. It's using radio waves, believe it or not. So this one was still using the radio wave, but later on it used the cell technology, which is basically cells, as opposed to just a wave. And the idea, think of it as like a honeycomb, the cells. So that made the radio wave a little more secure, and you didn't get as many, figuratively speaking, dropped calls. But yeah, those were the portable telephones. They were the first radio, portable telephones, attaché case cell phones. And the one that was used by the inventor of the cell phone looked a little bit more actually like this one. And the first cell phone call was done by a guy called Martin Cooper. And you can look up on the internet or in the library. Martin Cooper's still alive. He was a nice Jewish boy from New York. And who do you think he called? I know you're all guessing mother. But, because I said nice Jewish boy. And he is a nice Jewish boy, but he didn't call his mom. He actually called his competition. He was working for Motorola, and he called AT&T and basically said something like, gotcha. And that phone call was made April 3rd, 1973. So that was the first official cell phone call. It's legendary. And it was actually made right off the streets of New York. And that is my show. Thank you very much. When people interview me and they ask me, how did I get into this? I always tell them there are two impetus to every entrepreneur. Impetus number one, a passion for something. Impetus number two, bad bosses. Yeah, I see by your laughing that you agree. And so basically you try to do what I call a Shawshank Redemption. And that's what I did. I thought about what it is I love to do, and I felt that I needed to make a change in society and help people and make my mark on the world. Do something. The highest mitzvah is to change somebody's life. So hopefully this will inspire you guys to do interesting things, and at least to learn some interesting things.